Good evening, everyone. My name is Seth Dewey, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. And what that looks like for me is I haven't felt the need to use a mind-altering substance since July 23rd of 2017. And thank you so much for letting me share this evening and this third session of the Reno Recovery Collaborative's Community Conversations with you. How many of you were here for our first and second sessions, one or the other or both? Awesome. That's good to see. So thank you all for coming back. Now, for those of you that are new, thank you so much for joining us. That's the goal. That's been the goal the entire time, is to get more people to come and join us. Please notice the screen behind me and take the opportunity to do as others are already doing by going to www.menti.com and use that code, and feel free to answer that question. What do you feel is a solution to substance misuse? And we're going to go back to that later on. We have mentioned since the very first session that our goals in these events is to educate, to empower, and then to engage. Every single session has done this. How so? Well, let's take a little bit of a recap real quick. In the first session, we focused on personal stories with several of our panelists on substance use disorder and the stigma that's associated with it, including, predominantly in those ones, the self-stigma and the social stigma. In the second event, we discussed the deeper structural stigma, the barriers in the very core of our systems and policies that make it harder for ones to speak openly about substance use, get fair treatment in everyday life, housing, jobs, and even access to treatment for their substance use. And in the end, we ended with a great discussion on recovery capital. And we're going to revisit that again a little later too. Now tonight, though, we talk about solutions. We're going to hear from professionals in our area to hear some more experiences, some in recovery, some not. But all of them are professionals. I can assure you of that. So first of all, help me in welcoming Vanessa Loaf from Wichita State as she starts us off for our community conversation.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. As Seth said, my name is Vanessa, and I'm a social worker, a community convener, and a trainer who grew up as the child of someone who misuses alcohol. So this conversation is very important to me and how I've grown up. I'd like to begin tonight by asking you to envision an imaginary garden or field somewhere in Reno County. That patch of land has been under a great deal of stress. It's been ignored by its caretaker. There's been a drought of light and water. People even go by occasionally and dump chemicals or drop their trash there. Over time, any plants that were there become dry and brittle, or they disappear completely and don't return. Now imagine the Reno County community as that garden. If the soil of the Reno County garden is contaminated by stigma, violence, poor air and water quality, poverty, lack of quality and affordable housing, or poor access to food and health care, Imagine what might grow or might not in that space. Over time, this community soil that is overstressed can produce things like abuse or neglect, physical and mental illness, homelessness, violence, and substance misuse. Chronic exposure to these kinds of toxic levels of stress can impact the garden for generations. The stigma that comes with many of these individual or collective experiences, like being poor or homeless or someone who misuses alcohol or drugs, has been a part of our collective soil for so long that it has a powerful influence on how we think and how our systems are designed to function. Sometimes we call this bias. Bias is a disproportionate weight in favor of or against a person, a group, or a belief, usually in a way that's closed-minded, prejudicial, or unfair. These biases become filters for all of the information that come into our brains and influence the way we see the world, the choices we make, and they're so ingrained that we often don't even know they're there, but they pollute the soil just the same. Now relax in your chair, feel your feet on the floor, and imagine a different garden. One where the caretaker provides the water, light, and nutrients the soil needs, protects it from the elements, and maybe even sings to it. You know who you are. The plants that grow there are strong and healthy and have what they need to endure any temporary stresses that might come along, like a cold Kansas winter or a really hot Kansas summer. A community that's free from stigma and discrimination and rich in resources that create safe, stable, and nurturing environments to live, work, pray, and play can do the same thing for the people who live there. You all are the caretakers of that garden. What you put into the soil at home, at work, or in the community will determine what grows from it. Positive outcomes require you to be attentive, supportive, and engaged with the people and the processes that support recovery and healing. If you've attended one of the previous anti-stigma events, you've heard about the negative impacts that adversity, trauma, and stigma have on individuals who misuse substances and the people who love and care for them. However, what we know now is that there are key positive experiences that can prevent and even counteract those impacts and bring hope to our communities. Healthy outcomes from positive experiences, or hope, includes 4 building blocks that are deeply interconnected with one another. The first building block is building and maintaining supportive relationships, and for kids that means with parents, their peers, and with adults outside of the family. And I can't stress this particular building block enough. There's a guy that I kind of am a bit of a groupie of. His name is Bruce Perry, and he's a neurobiologist that has been studying the impact of positive and negative experiences on the brains of children for more than 30 years. He has found that the more relationships a child has, the more likely he'll be able to recover from trauma and thrive. He says, relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is human love. Yes. I would add you don't have to be a therapist to be therapeutic. Thank you. Short, intentional acts of kindness can be just as therapeutic as an hour in a therapist's office. My apologies to the clinicians in the room. The next building block is environment. This includes safe, equitable, and stable places to live, play, and learn. Specifically, positive school and home environments are key to preventing adversity and promoting healing. That might look like making sure people have adequate access to quality food or health care or dental care, or that the community has safe public spaces for play or exercise, such as sidewalks, bike paths, and parks. The third key building block is opportunities for building social-emotional skills, like managing our feelings and emotions in positive ways, expressing compassion and empathy, and communicating in culturally appropriate ways. But the last hope building block is opportunities for community members to be engaged and develop a sense of belonging, that they are seen and that they matter. This includes an awareness of cultural customs or traditions that are important to the families that are in the community. It also includes involvement in social or civic groups like your church, organized sports or music, 4-H, or the Reno County Recovery Collaborative. For those of you who were fortunate enough to be at the last event, you had the opportunity to hear Maddie Bennett talk about the importance of recovery capital. This framework of hope, which again includes supportive relationships, healthy environments, positive social emotional development, and active engagement, are all part of the process for building that recovery capital at the individual, family, and community levels in ways that help us to avoid stigma and build on each individual's strengths and connections. I want to leave you this evening with a few questions to reflect on as you listen to the stories of the others that are here this evening. First, as you listen, what elements of hope do you hear? What would it look like to infuse hope into all of your interactions, whether they're at home with your families, at work with your colleagues, or just being out in the community with your neighbors? What resources do you need or can you offer to make hope happen? And my last question for you this evening is, what do you want to contribute to the soil of Reno County? Thanks for being here, everyone.
Wow. Thank you, Vanessa. Everyone, if you could, just take a moment to think about your favorite points out of that. And I want you to remember those. For here in a few, we're going to go back to that, and you can share that with one of your neighbors that you're sitting next to. So let's just take a moment to think about something that stuck out to you with what Vanessa just shared with us. All right, that's awkward enough for me. So keep that in mind while we go on to our next panelist. And this one, some of you might know. So please give your attention to Carla Smith.
I'm not very close to the mic, but I'm pretty loud, so I feel like we're good. All right. Thank you guys for being here. I think it's just incredible to see so many of the same people that have been at some of the other events. And when I think back about some of the stories that we've heard and some of the people who spoke at the last two, we've seen some amazing people who have done amazing things. And We're going to hear a couple more tonight that are just as amazing. And just hearing those, I hope, will make you want to move to change the stigma of substance use disorder. I think that from what I've heard, and even from being involved for so long, I still heard things that moved me and made me want to change the way that I think or the bias that I put in the soil. I think we've heard some incredible stuff. So what I'm going to share with you is just a little bit of a different perspective, but it's also very similar to what Vanessa had to say, so don't fall asleep, stick with me. I'm Carla. I am the director at Rise Up Reno Prevention Network. Our agency is really a coalition, which is a group of people who come together from different backgrounds and different areas with different opinions and try to work on a common issue. And the issue we work on is underage drug and alcohol use. So our coalition meets once a month, and there's information. I would love to share more information with you if you're interested. But we try to look at what's really going on in our community and put things in place to help kids have better lives. I want to take what we learned from the conversations here, and I want to use that to make a difference in our own lives. One of my favorite things that we've talked about is about the recovery capital. I had never heard this concept until we started this conversation. It gives me hope. People are dealing with addictions can gather supports, they can gather connections, they can learn, they can teach, and be a support to each other. And when they bring all of that together, they have capital that they need to make small changes, big changes, really big changes. And that's incredible. How amazing would it be if all of the people who were suffering had had a chance to bring that capital together prior to the drugs or other substances that entered their lives. I want to throw another concept into the big picture. What if we could gather support before the substances become part? What about prevention? Maybe this is where we acknowledge that some people have more opportunities than others. When we look at inequity, we have to recognize that many humans are blessed with supports and opportunities early on and from the start. Some of us suffer through trauma, mental health disorders, other adverse child experiences, commonly known as ACEs, and even adult experiences that make us more vulnerable to the clutch of substance use disorder. This is where we need to find the place for prevention. Prevention is to stop something from happening before it ever happens. Can we stop ACEs? Can we stop trauma? Maybe, sometimes. Some trauma could be avoided, but most of it is out of our control. My husband and I have foster kids in our home. Some of them come from homes filled with trauma, drugs, neglect, domestic abuse, a lot of pain. Hopefully, sometimes, some of that trauma is prevented when those kids can be moved out of those houses and into a better situation. But then there's more trauma. There's the trauma of being moved, the trauma of loss, being away from their family. But that isn't the end. My family believes we can implement some protective factors in those young lives to keep them from suffering all the pain that their parents are probably going through. Sometimes it works. We always recommend counseling, sometimes Al-Anon. We encourage them to bond with someone. We try to bond with every foster kid. But if it isn't one of us, maybe it can be a mentor at school, a youth group leader, a teacher, a coach. By the time these kids get to us, they already have a lot of pain, which often leads to self-medicating and possibly a long and difficult battle with substance use disorder. We have walked this journey with several of them. We've seen heartbreak and we've seen success. Some of our kids didn't make it. Some are currently in prison, and some are doing great. A lot of our kids overcame all these risk factors. They learned from them. They learned from things they saw that they didn't want to do. And they're going on to live their best lives. Those young people responded to the support they were offered. They put together the capital they needed. They went on and did the best they could. We still join them in the ups and downs of being adults, and now we celebrate every day that they aren't using substances. We get to be involved with their children, and we get to witness the protective factors that they're using with their own kids. Yes, I said protective factors. When we talk about trauma, neglect, and abuse, it's easy to understand those are risk factors. They're a big part of the risk of substance misuse. Even if we can't get rid of the risk, we can find some ways to protect. We can find protective factors to use against substance misuse. Here are some protective factors, some key things that parents and other people can do to help to control some of the circumstances around their kids in order to build kids that are more resilient against trauma and substance misuse. Research has identified these 4 categories: family, school, community, and peer individual. The first thing right out of the bat is attachment to family. Most of us have heard about this. We've heard of attachment disorders. We've heard of, kids that didn't have anybody that was there for them. It's not just parents. It could be anybody. Somebody in the family needs to be spending time attaching and bonding. The next thing that families need is opportunities to be involved together. Opportunities to be a part of the family, whether it's having a responsibility like feeding the dog or getting the dishes off the table. And then opportunities for recognition. So when kids are doing something good at home, sometimes if they've done a lot of not so good, it's hard to recognize the good. It's hard not to dwell on the bad. But if we can stop and take the time to notice that even though it took 15 extra minutes to get the kid to the car this morning, he did get up on time. He even brushed his teeth. So there's 2 out of 3, and that's not bad. School is the next place we need to see some protective factors in place. School needs to offer opportunities for involvement and then recognition for those positive involvements. I think the schools in Reno County have amazing teachers, amazing staff. I think that they know about trauma, they know about ACEs, they know that kids need attention and that they need positive reinforcement. We're lucky that we have that in our soil. The third support would be community. Community, same thing, opportunities for involvement, recognition. If you're involved with something in the community, take a kid with you. Grab your neighbor kid, your kid at home, your grandkid. If you can't take them with you, let them know what you're involved in. Let them know why it's important to you, and let them know why you give back to your community. Encourage them and then recognize them. I think it's great when somebody has a lemonade stand and everybody in town sends all their friends on Facebook and reminds those kids that they're important and that they matter and that they're proud of them. And I love it when those kids are gathering money and then donating it to somebody. How incredible is that? We need to make sure that they're recognized. The 4th category is the hardest, I think. It's about the peer, the individual. And it's hard to motivate a kid to take care of themselves or to do things for themselves when they don't have anybody there with them. So this is important that they get this encouragement from their inside, from themselves. And it may take encouragement from others. Peer individual, first off, we need social skills. Kids need to be able to survive in a social interaction, and they learn that from watching and from being around adults and from practice. They also need to believe in the moral order, which could be as simple as knowing right from wrong. If they know that there is right and there is wrong and there is an order to things, there are consequences for actions, If you take them to church, if they're learning Bible verses, if you're teaching them about a moral order, they're going to have a better success rate. The third thing is emotional control. This is something I have to practice as an adult as well. And the fourth is interaction with positive peers. We always tell our kids that people are going to recognize you by the company you keep. So if you're hanging around with positive people, people will think you're a positive kid. And it's the same for adults. And that's a really big protection factor for kids to avoid drug and alcohol misuse and to avoid other risky behaviors. Some of these factors may be easy enough for some families. It doesn't guarantee a life free of issues, but kids who have these protections are most certain to have less number of issues than those who don't. Avoiding those issues, that's prevention. And it's a part of the solution. It's part of the solution to substance use disorder and in turn to the stigma. I want to tell you something about people who have fought and are fighting substance use disorder and the stigma. They have good hearts. They're good people, and they would do anything for you or anybody else who needed a hand. If you want somebody to help you fight a battle, find someone who's already fought it. They'll be there for you, and they'll hold your hand through it. But when it comes to their own kids, what they really want is to prevent the fight. We don't want to go to that battle. I want to personally ask you to get involved with young people when they start to misuse, before they start to misuse tobacco, alcohol, or other drugs. What does that look like for you? That can look as simple as offering opportunities and giving positive recognition to the kids at your neighbor's house or the people who walk by your place of work. All of the schools, churches, organizations in Reno County have youth who could use some extra support. Get involved, become a school-based mentor, become a for Big Brothers Big Sisters, become a volunteer someplace, even in your front yard, even where you work. Give our kids opportunities and positive feedback. That could be enough to protect a young person more than you can imagine. Prevention saves money, heartache, pain, and prevention saves lives.
Thank you so much, Carla, for sharing that with us. So we just took in a lot of information in a very short amount of time. So what we're going to do is here pretty soon, we're going to take 3 minutes for you to process this information with the ones you're sitting next to. We want you to share your thoughts with one another, the things that stuck out to you, the things that meant something to you. Also, if you have questions for our two panelists, please keep those in mind as we will have an opportunity for questions and answers at the end of the session. All right, so I'm going to start my timer now for 3 minutes. That way I don't feel so awkward just standing here without an ending point. So I'm starting it right now. 3 minutes is a long time. So thank you all for taking some time to process that, what we just heard, and even more so, thank you for taking the time to discuss that and share it with the ones sitting next to you. All of you should have received, or at least could have received, a sheet of paper with a QR code on it. Did everyone get one of those? No? That's you, Thomas. Okay. So if anybody doesn't have one, I know a gentleman right up here at the front who would be happy to grab one for you. And please take the time to scan that QR code and fill out the survey that's on there. And what this will allow us to do is to get your input on the issues that we've discussed, but it also allows for you to enter in your email address to be able to join the Reno Recovery Collaborative. Don't worry, you will not be getting any spam. You will just be getting updates from us and our community partners, and be let known of when our Zoom meetings are, which are held once a month on the third Tuesday of the month during the lunch hour. And right now we're still meeting on Zoom, so it's a little more convenient for us to do that. So please fill out that survey. Let us know your thoughts to the questions asked, and please, 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 let us hear your voice with the Reno Recovery Collaborative. Now, we're going to get on to the good stuff, more of our panelists. That way you guys don't have to listen to me anymore. So we're going to introduce now Jackie Espinoza. So everyone, please give Jackie your rapt attention.
Hello. My name is Jackie, and I'm a person in long-term recovery, which means I haven't had a drink or a drug since October 4th, 2018. Okay. Drugs have always been a part of my story. Long before I started drinking and smoking weed in middle school, I had a lengthy history of dealing with the use of family members and their friends. I started having my kids in high school, and when I had my third when I was 21, I was introduced to methamphetamines by my boyfriend when I was 23. But by the time I was 28, I thought I had it totally together when I graduated the counselor training program at the well-known treatment facility I worked at and received state certification as a person-centered case manager. On the outside, I was flourishing, but my personal life was falling apart. I'd been in an abusive relationship since I was 20 years old. My mental health was terrible, and at that point, I had been abusing my prescription medications for a long time. I could make myself feel any way I wanted because I had stimulants, benzodiazepines, and narcotic pain pills that I filled every single month. I was trying my best, but I was failing. The relationship ended, and I fell into a severe depression. I made a plan to completely change my situation. That included my children temporarily moving away from me. And that snapped the hold I had on my sanity. I fell harder than I ever thought possible. I spiraled into homelessness, hospitalizations, and drug use. I found myself selling drugs as a way to get by. I was unwelcome and unwanted almost everywhere I went. I was assaulted multiple times and robbed once, even at gunpoint. But through it all, I wanted something more. I never stopped applying for jobs. I would ask people to let me move into their closet for a chance to get my head above water. I sought out detox and treatment more than 5 different times, and I was told I wasn't eligible for admission each time because I wasn't bad enough. I wasn't pregnant. I wasn't an IV drug user. I wasn't using opiates, and I had no insurance. The message I heard, even though it's not what they said, was that I didn't matter, something I was already vividly aware of. I began to believe that it was hopeless, and I was just destined to die in this life. It's not what I wanted. It's the only thing that I could do when everything I tried to do to get better just fell apart before it ever even got started. Every door shut in my face, every phone call was a rejection, and I was completely broken. But I knew the way out. I knew I needed detox and treatment, and I knew I needed it before anything else would work. And then I started going to jail, and I kept going to jail. I was booked into the Reno County Jail 10 times in the course of a year. Most of those were for missing court, but there were a few possession cases and a distribution case. I was charged with distributing less than a gram of meth they found in a duffel bag next to someone else that was far enough away I couldn't even see them. My arrest report that night states we determined the drugs to be hers because there was makeup in the bag. I was offered a plea agreement, and I accepted it. Part of accepting that plea meant I had to plead guilty to 6 felonies, including the distribution case, which made me a registered drug offender for the next 15 years. The woman who did my pre-sentence investigation suggested that it would go better for me if I was living in an Oxford house when I went to sentencing. I knew I still needed inpatient treatment, but I followed her advice, and I was placed on community corrections. And now I was ineligible for drug court and Senate Bill 123 because of that distribution conviction. And still, I struggled. I asked for inpatient treatment during my drug and alcohol assessment that was required by the judge, and they again told me no because I'd never failed at a lower level of care, so I was put into outpatient groups 3 times a week. And still, I struggled. I did not do well in Oxford. I couldn't find a job. I still felt like I wasn't gaining traction and I was destined to fail. And I did. I relapsed twice in the first 4 months following my sentencing, once after 54 days of sobriety, the second time after 84 days. The first time, I managed to keep it a secret, at least from my corrections officer. But the second time, I tried something different and I lied. I lied during the intake call to a detox center, and I told them that I had been using opiates. And finally, they told me to come in. I was afraid they were going to make me leave when I didn't test positive for opiates, so when they told me the results of my drug test, I wanted to cry. I was hours away from home. I'd been dropped off in the middle of the night by people I wouldn't call my friends. So I told them that I'd been taking tramadol, and explained all the times I'd been told no. I really had been taking tramadol, but that's not how I made it sound on the phone. But they let me stay. They didn't ask for a commitment at first, longer than the 5-day detox program. And then they asked me if I wanted to go home, and I told them no. So then I went into treatment. And once I finished that, they asked me again if I was ready to go home, and I said no. I ended up staying in treatment for a total of 54 days. Then I came home, moved back into Oxford, and I finally started to make progress. I immediately started working, and I've become successful. I have custody of my youngest son. I've gotten married, moved into a house, started going to school, found a profession that I never thought I'd love. I successfully completed corrections with no violations, and I have a relationship with my older 2 children. But throughout all of my success, I never stopped thinking about how hard it was to find it, especially when I knew exactly what I needed from the very beginning. And I realized it doesn't have to be that hard. It should never be that hard to find help. I was introduced to the idea of harm reduction during my training at the treatment center, and I thought they were insane. It sounded like a way to coddle the people using substances and a way to make it easier for them to continue using with the syringe exchange programs and the safe consumption sites. But then I lived my experience. Suddenly, I understood. There is no compassion for people struggling and trapped by addiction. Nobody listens to what you say. They just assume it's a lie or a manipulation. Nobody cares. It's a common assumption that caring equals enabling. I knew to my core that society as a whole would consider themselves better off if I had just died out there on some lonely street corner or in a trashy hotel room. If I ever needed a reminder of that, all I had to do was watch the comments on Facebook about people I knew who had been arrested, people that were just as miserable and desperately wanting something different as I had been. It's a terrible, demeaning, and lonely feeling that kept me and everyone I have ever known who struggles with addiction trapped in a cycle we all wanted out of. Nobody's having a good time. Nobody wants to do this forever. Nobody I knew then had found a way to get out and stay out. So I realized there had to be a way to connect those who are lost and trapped to the services and help they were desperately looking for. And I refused to believe that other people should have to struggle like I did just because I did. And then I found myself in a meeting at an Oxford house with my new friends who were talking about harm reduction in Reno County. This was back at the very start of us increasing access to naloxone in the area. We started with the Oxford houses, but eventually it grew into Addicts Against Overdose, and that grew into Kansas Recovery Network. We began public distributions of naloxone and wound care kits, trying to raise awareness. We were just trying to keep people alive because nobody else was. Because we know that people don't deserve to die just because they use drugs. Harm reduction services can be, and when they're done correctly, they are the missing piece. There is no single goal in harm reduction for the entire population of people who misuse substances. We don't dictate what their goals should be. We listen to them. We let them be the experts of their own needs. Besides giving out over 1,800 doses of naloxone and providing trainings, we've helped people find their way to detox, inpatient treatment, 12-step meetings, and Oxford houses. And we did that because they asked us to, not because we thought they needed it or because some legal entity told them that they had to. People who misuse substances are actually 5 times more likely to find their own way to treatment if they receive harm reduction services. It doesn't, and it will never work 100% for everyone. There will be people who have no desire to get better, but they are the exception, not the rule. Treating people who misuse substances as humans, with no judgment, with no condemnation, with nothing but concern for their well-being, is something that very few of them are used to. We also know and understand that the people who love someone the most are statistically the least effective at getting someone the help they need. Parents, spouses, and children have all earned their anger. I would never presume to tell anyone that the trauma caused by a loved one's addiction is invalid. It hurts, and it goes deep, and I know why those traumas make it sound like harm reduction has no chance. But the unconditional compassion and encouragement of someone who has been there and done it before is invaluable to this population. Those of you who are struggling with a loved one's addiction must set boundaries. And that's where harm reduction, Addicts Against Overdose, Kansas Recovery Network, and various other forms of fellowship can step in. Even outside of my history of drug use and my criminal record, I found a stigma associated with harm reduction. We've been blamed for causing the overdose problem and encouraging drug use. We've been accused of trying to profit off the suffering of others. We've been told that we're wrong and that we're going to kill people. Nevertheless, we know that what we're doing is helping. Our concern is to reduce the harm of drug use to everyone in the community, not just the person using. We've spent time with parents. We've hugged those who have recently lost someone to an overdose. In fact, we have more loved ones come to our naloxone events than people who misuse substances. But naloxone isn't the only way to help. We hope to someday create a syringe disposal system to reduce the number of syringes found on the streets and thereby reduce the chance that a police officer, child, or trash worker could accidentally be pricked. Just a large, locked metal box that can't be broken into, placed in an easily accessible location. Harm reduction boils down to 3 words: any positive change. I'm not presumptuous enough to be here tonight to try to tell you guys that harm reduction in Reno County is going to solve our drug problem. I'm not here to make it seem like I was some poor victim of the system. I was guilty of everything Reno County ever charged me with and more. But I am here to say the negative consequences that stem from the addictive use of substances affect the community as a whole, from those improperly disposed of syringes to drunk drivers and exposure to diseases. They are real, and they can be measured fiscally, medically, and socially. Harm reduction strives to find a realistic and practical solution to these problems, something that actually works to improve the experience of the community and to help those suffering with addiction to find a little bit of humanity. We all live with basic forms of harm reduction in our daily lives, everything from seatbelts and condoms to toothpaste and vaccines. I will never promise you that harm reduction strategies will save everyone. I can't even promise you that naloxone will save everyone who overdoses, but it's a chance. I can promise you that harm reduction has the potential to change the lives of individuals who have no one else on their side. And I can also promise you that if enough individual lives are changed, we will begin to see the results this community desperately needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jackie, for sharing your experience and part of what shaped you into who you are now, which, by the way, is one amazing human being. So can we think about some things that stuck out to us in that story? I have a couple. Please keep that in mind, because we're going to do the same thing after our next panelist. We're going to have you discuss it with your neighbors, so keep those things in mind. Now, everyone, please give your attention to our next speaker, Gary Race. We anxiously await you.
Hi, my name is Gary Race, and I'm a person in long-term recovery. What that means for me is I haven't had a drink or a drug since March 20th of 2020, and I believe that we are all here tonight because of the courage to see not the world as it is, but the world as how it should be. My drug addiction started small at the age of 13 with simple marijuana and drinking on the weekends. This would continue until I was 17, and I was shown the drug meth. I was shown this drug by two men very much older than me, and it just started as a regular recreational activity every now and then, until I found out that the older man that I was using with also had a prescription to benzodiazepine Xanax, and that was when I quickly discovered that I was a downers person. Continuing down that path until I was about 19, and I was shown how to intravenously use the opiate Dilaudid. I was instantly hooked, instantly wanting to get more, going to any and every length to get it. At 20, I quit IV using Dilaudids and went back to drinking again. At this time, I didn't know the stages of relapsing and drug use, and that it would inevitably lead me back to doing my drug of choice. So I started snorting and popping oxys by the handful again, and then started shooting Dilaudids and black tar heroin. Heroin took a hold of me. It helped bury trauma, shame, and guilt. I eventually ended up losing the manager position at the job that I had at the time and moving to Leavenworth. When I first moved to Leavenworth, I did what I would call good for a while, because still in my head, if I wasn't doing pills and I didn't have a needle in my arm, I was okay. I eventually would turn in Leavenworth into a new stomping grounds, new people, but the same places, the same drugs. It was a vicious cycle, and eventually I moved back to Hutch, and that's when my addiction began to spiral again. I gave everything away. The reason why I use the term gave everything away instead of losing it all and losing everything again was because the resources that I've gained in recovery today helped me realize that I could get it all back. So after catching 3 felony drug cases in less than 1 year, numerous times in jail, numerous attempts in treatment and detox centers, it was decided by a judge that prison was what was best for me. I was once again being treated by the system like a criminal for a disease that I had for which there's no known cure. But I thought maybe if I went and did this time, I could get some clean time and get out and start a brand new life. Little did I know that being a homosexual male in a men's prison, there were drugs readily available to me as soon as I stepped into a camp in every pod of every building. It was just like being out on the streets. I had nothing, I had no one, and I was once again shooting meth and smoking K2 by the bag. I was released from Kansas Department of Corrections, Lansing Correctional Facility, and brought by bus back to Hutchinson the first weekend of January of 2020. I went and saw my family that I hadn't seen in forever. I moved into an Oxford house, and then unfortunately I relapsed. This was a full-blown relapse on heroin. I had picked right back up where I left off before I went to prison. I was on the run from corrections again, and this time parole was involved. A month into this relapse, I'll never forget screaming and crying, doing my last shot of heroin, that I'd become such a fiend, and I didn't know when it had happened. I'd gave everything away again, and at this time, I knew that I wanted a way out, and I couldn't find one. So my sister, who had been searching this town for me, finally convinced me to go turn myself into the jail. I did, and a week later went in front of the judge, thinking I was going to have to serve my underline and go back to prison. McCarville was my sentencing judge on the case, who today I owe a large part of my recovery to. He showed me mercy, and I was gracefully accepted into the drug court program. That was in March of 2020. I was released from jail on the 21st. Straight from there, I knocked on the door of Oxford House Neum. They were full, but the men agreed to couch me for the night. After that, I was taken to Phillips Weck's Oxford House. Another guy interviewed before me and got the bed. Webster was the beginning of my recovery journey in Oxford, because in Oxford, our first tradition is we get housing for the addict who has stopped using and to stay stops. As soon as that bed at Phillips West was filled, the guys in that house made sure to do anything in their power to get me into another house. It holds a special place in my heart, and it will always be home to me. When I first got there, I got a job at KFC. It was quick because COVID had just started and finding employment was hard. I worked there for a bit, but I still had so many barriers to work through and a schedule that was nearly impossible for them to work around. With drug court, I had outpatient 4 times a week. I had numerous corrections appointments, being on a color code UA line. That's when I contacted Lacey Lomax because I heard about the TJP program. She told me to come in that Monday for an interview, where I was interviewed by the crews. They do their interviews simple to an Oxford one. Let us tell them our experience, ask questions, because one thing the transitional jobs program makes sure of is that we all have an equal voice in our place of employment. I was hired then and there and finished out my 2 weeks at this other job. My time in TJP was a blessing. They helped me get new teeth, helped me pay a reinstatement fee for my license. They worked with me through drug court, mental health appointments, corrections appointment, and all of that they helped me with. But most of all, we had 4 supervisors who were on the job support: Lacey Lomax, Derek Doherty, Chastity Jenkins, and Brian Schoening. They were what we call on the job support and always had an open door policy for us. If we were off our square, if we were triggered by anything, if our personal lives were struggling, there they were for us. In any way, calling them on the job support, though, would be a downplay in my opinion, because it was so much bigger than that. Calling Lacey on a Sunday because my friend had just overdosed and there she was, with a nice dinner and arms to hold me through it, or the fellowship of football parties at Brian's house. Derek, who has his phone on 24/7 for us, or Chastity, who brought her daughter from California to meet all of us. Because here at TJP, the Transitional Jobs Program, Shar Gonzalez created this amazing thing. Crews of recovering drug addicts who over the course of 10 months became my family, held me accountable, told me when I was off my square, and celebrated all my victories with me. My 10th month, I had completed my barriers of the Transitional Jobs Program. I had graduated from drug court, outpatient, the peer mentoring program with Sunshine Chapman, who can't go unrecognized. She was the biggest resource that drug court gave me. I had got all the funding for my teeth. My time was coming. When I did my barriers assessment with Lacey, when I first got that job, it was asked what job I wanted. I told her from the jump that I had wanted to work in the kitchen at the detox center. My main goal was to become a peer mentor. I had been a client of SAC for 2 years, so the fear was I was going to have to wait to get that job. Well, when the detox center opened, I walked into Crossover Recovery to meet with Sunshine. I had just graduated from there, and they all encouraged me to apply at the detox center. Well, when the detox center opened, the peer mentors of Crossover all encouraged me to apply because it was a separate entity. So I did the unthinkable and I filled out an application. But then I found out that I would have to be off of community corrections in order to start this job. The resource I utilized for this was actually a person, Seth Dewey, showed me and walked me through how to put in a pro se motion for early termination from corrections. I did it with his help and had a court hearing set for 2 weeks out. So nervous because I hadn't been away from any legal trouble since the age of 21. That would mean for me no unpaid fines, no probation, no corrections, no parole. I had realized that I'd been treated like a criminal for nearly most of my adult life because of a disease for which there is no known cure. I go in front of the judge representing myself with Seth, who has been by my side and a peer mentor a peer showing and helping me with these resources since I came into recovery. I had letters from Lacey, Jackie, Derek, and my sponsor Thomas, the people who had watched me excel in recovery in Oxford and in the courtroom, or in the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous. When I went in front of Judge McCarville, who was shocked to see me in his courtroom again and read my motion, he asked why I was wanting termination from corrections. I told him about the job at the detox center. His words verbatim to everyone in the courtroom were, well, everyone, Gary, who we had a couple bumps with in the first phase of drug court, is a success story of our program. Gary, we have all seen everything that you've accomplished, everything you've done for so many. Your motions are granted, go get your job, and laughingly told me to stay out of his courtroom. It was a weight lifted that I couldn't even wait till the door of the courtroom was closed before I aggressively hugged my friend with tears in my eyes. That next week, I interviewed with Chad Harmon at the detox center. He gave me a full-time position with the start date. I go tell the crews at TJP. I go tell my Oxford family. I had finally done it. I finally built this life that I had always dreamt of, and those dreams didn't stop there. How could they? When recovery, we say the sky is the limit, and what Jackie Espinoza told me in early recovery was when I've accomplished all the goals that I've set, to never stop setting more. Sometimes it's still so unreal to me that a lost and hopeless person like me who never knew there was a way out is sitting on a panel tonight telling others in this community what I have today and the resources I used to gain it all. As long as you are still breathing, there is hope, and I promise there's a way out.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks for sharing your story, and more importantly, thank you for sharing your way out. Thank you for sharing the hope, and thank you for sharing those resources that are still out there and available for others to take advantage of. Now, once again, we're going to give you some time to discuss and process what you heard. But also, remember the question that created the word cloud earlier? What do you feel is a solution to substance use disorder? Well, we're going to go ahead and have that question asked again. But now that you heard tonight's panelist, please go back to that site, enter that code, and please enter in answers as they might have changed. Maybe they haven't. But please feel free to answer that question again on that word cloud at www.menti.com. And there's the code. I'm hoping you can see it because I am having issues at this sideways angle. So what we're going to do is allow for, this time we'll do 4 minutes for you guys to talk with one another about these other two panelists, what stuck out to you, and also have some time to answer that, but also go to that QR code and do that survey as well. 4 minutes starting 10 seconds ago. Thank you all for processing and participating. So before we move into the questions for our panelists that you'll be able to come right down here to the microphones and ask them, we're going to do a quick recap of tonight's event. So let's think back. First of all, we had Vanessa, and she so vividly helped us to paint a picture in our minds of two gardens. One where the plants were growing strong and healthy and could withstand the things that came along. The other, not so much. Our communities are these gardens, and we are the caretakers or the gardeners. What we put in the soil will determine what grows from it. What a powerful illustration, but even more so, what an empowering illustration. It shows us that we have the power to change these things. Next, we had Carla. She talked to us about protective factors and prevention. This, too, went hand in hand with Vanessa's building blocks of hope, healthy outcomes of positive experiences. See, Carla helped us to see how the protective factors can help children to be more resilient to trauma, and therefore avoiding potential risky behaviors like substance misuse before they even get started. Wouldn't that be ideal? Next, we had Jackie. See, Jackie went through some rough things in her story. She felt like, and I quote, that she didn't matter, that it was all hopeless, and that she felt as if she was destined to die in this life. Thanks to structural stigma, like we talked about in our second panel, the policies and regulations in place, it was hard for Jackie to get the treatment she needed. She wasn't bad enough. See, someone else was setting a standard for her individual needs. She couldn't get the treatment she needed. She wasn't eligible for drug court because of a drug conviction. But fortunately, she stuck with it. She may have lied to get the help that she needed. And isn't that sad? Does that show us an area where we could maybe make improvements? Jackie, though, found hope. And she is working to make things better by improving the systems in place, fixing structural stigma, and helping others make any positive change by preaching loudly the message of radical love known as harm reduction. Then we had Gary. Gary started using substances at a young age and found that this was a way for him to bury the hurt and pain and trauma. Remember that point in his experience where he said, "I'll never forget screaming and crying during my last use that it had gotten this bad. That he had given everything away again, and that he wanted a way out, but just couldn't find one." Fortunately, he made changes. He found support multiple times. He had a lot of resources within this very community and people that didn't ask why the addiction, like Gabor Mate states, they asked why the pain. And they understood that because they too had gone through that. See, Gary found connection. And I'll say it again. I see Derek looking at me. That the opposite of addiction is connection. like Johann Hari says. And look at Gary now after using those resources. He's a detox tech at SAC Residential, and what is he doing? He's contributing to building that recovery capital in his own way, being able to show others that there's a way out, showing them those resources, and then potentially getting other people to then be detox techs as well. Isn't that an amazing circle right there? What an amazing and complimentary panel we had tonight. Now, I want you in the audience to please feel free to come up to the microphones and ask any questions that you might have for our panelists tonight. Yes, that's the part where you come up to the front. There we go.
I would really like to rephrase, reframe, and affirm the wonderful gift and blessing that you guys have given us here this evening. Vanessa, thank you so much for identifying that these people need hope, and especially thank you for recognizing that you don't have to be a therapist to touch someone and to make a difference in their life. Carla, thank you for recognizing that relationships and trauma are a factor. I'm a crisis counselor and a mental health case manager. 90% of my clients have a trauma history. And I can tell you know how to value people. You know how to value children. That's obvious. Jackie, you matter more. You do. And Gary, no shame, no guilt. I don't want you to feel shame. I am not ashamed of you. I am proud of you. I want you and Jackie to wear who you are as a crown. Absolutely. Because you make a difference. You have power, the power to create life in people who have no hope, who need value. And that is the, as I listen to you, the common theme, the epiphany for me in what is a solution. I put that little word value up there. That I think maybe the very definition of civilization is when we reach a point that we give, affirm, and discover value in people who have no value. Now, that wasn't my judgment. I'm not saying that people who use drugs and have trauma history have no value. That's unfortunately their assessment of themselves. And thank you for recognizing, Carla, that relationships, positive relationships, are what makes a difference. Because somebody valued that person. Somebody gave them value. And I think that is the very definition of civilization. Civilization's not defined by the people on the top. Civilization is defined by our ability to recognize the value in the people who consider themselves on the bottom. And I'd really like to hear you guys speak to that. Thank you so much for being who you are.
So if anybody has any other questions for our panelists?
I got one. one for Jackie. So like many other addicts, my name's Thomas and I am also an addict. Like a whole lot of other people when it comes to trying to get access to treatment and resources, I had to lie about how I was using drugs. I had to tell them that I was an intravenous user, and I was not. Otherwise, I was gonna have to sit in jail for however much longer. So for anybody who's having to do that, how do you think we should go as a community about changing that policy?
Well, I think that's going to start a lot with insurance companies for a lot of the treatment centers, because the insurance companies are unfortunately the ones who approve or deny coverage based on certain criteria. The treatment center that I went to and the one that just opened up here in town, I've never had them tell me no when I've called, or even if it's just somebody that had a little bit too much to drink. The one here in town has never told me no. So I think that hopefully maybe they're realizing that, and some of the state-funded ones are trying, but the ones that use insurance, a lot of that is because of the insurance companies and what they're willing to pay for and what they're not.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Jackie, and thank you, Thomas, for that question. Here we go.
Vanessa, I had a question as a fellow clinician, and I loved what you said. You don't have to be a therapist to touch someone's life. One of the things that I find myself having a conversation with numerous individuals in the week is exactly what trauma is, and oftentimes trauma is something that we don't get. What is your advice for helping spread that message of, I think sometimes individuals think trauma, it can only be significant abuse, things that are more what they think are catastrophic. How can we spread that message?
Wow, that's a great question. I think part of it is just helping people tell their stories and understanding that everyone experiences what happens in their life differently based on the resources that they have available to them to be able to deal with that. An example I often use in training is if there were a fire in a school in a second grade classroom, how the second graders see that versus the fifth graders on the other side of the school who were nowhere near but got evacuated, versus the first responders who have the tools that they need to run into the fire and not be afraid. Everyone had the exact same situation, but what they had, the tools they had to deal with it and the closer they were to the situation were different. And so how it impacts them is going to be different. And the number one thing that's going to help kids with that are relationships. I talk about kids a lot, but it's true for the adults as well. Those relationships that Carla talked about are very much a part of that. So I think just helping people tell their stories, good and bad, and to remember, you know, we come from a part of the country that is very focused on pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. And sometimes we have to remind folks who were there to help them put their boots on and who bought the boots for them. Because some folks just don't have boots to pull up. Mm-hmm. And so thinking about how we can help people remember who was there beside them as they came up is part of how we spread that message. Thanks for asking that question.
All right, does anybody else have a question? All right, here we go.
I don't know if I can reach this. Oh, anyway, I talk loud enough, I think. Each one of you have touched on all the subjects that I feel. I have a 33-year-old addict. He was diagnosed with ADD in 5th grade. He's a 6'3" young man and is still that tall. He stood out because he was bigger than the other kids, and he had a problem with paying attention. And naturally, whenever he spoke, he was louder than the other kids. Anyway, he was told that he was different. So he felt different. One of you mentioned that you can be, this young man is a very happy-go-lucky, people-oriented. He'd give you the shirt off his back. But unfortunately fell into the wrong crowd and tried to self-medicate. I gave him the right soil. He was an altar server at our church, attended religion class, attended school, never missed a day of school, was a good student until he fell into that trap of self-medicating. I gave him all the right tools. He had good relationship. Like I said, he was a good people-oriented. Everybody loves him. So he had the right tools, the right relationships. But unfortunately, it was this smoking marijuana at first, the drinking, and then he fell into meth. And that's when we started having real bad problems. He's been in and out of jail. He's been in prison. And unfortunately, he was in a relationship that was very toxic because they were both into drugs. You know that. Is it Martinez? This lady on the end, sorry. I can't remember your name. You're the one you. What was your last name again? Jackie. They thought it was okay. They thought it was normal to be in that kind of a relationship and to do what they were doing. They had become parents at a very young age of 16. Very well family-oriented, had the love and support of mom and dad, aunts, uncles, cousins, but it wasn't enough. So being in and out of prison, I even wrote to the judge and I said, you know, I've seen other cases where people that had more severe cases, they were able to go to drug court. How come that was never offered to my son? I put him in the early, I asked the court the very first time, I need help. I don't know what to do. He's 33 years old now and has been, like I said, in and out of prison, can't go to drug court, can't get any help in getting a job, which he's finally gotten one, an $8 paying job. He has a very good employer that can't offer him insurance, but he's trying. He's trying to raise his children, but he gets knocked down. How do I keep him up here rather than going down? And I think community engagement is very much needed, and I'm so happy to see this finally happen over the course of the time that my son's needed help, but he still can't get help. I've been shown different organizations, well, they can help him get a job. He's did that. He's been told no, or doesn't even get an answer sometimes, saying he's applied, you know. If it wasn't for his family involvement and support, which is a very, very strong foundation, he would probably relapse. And who knows? He just got out of release from Lansing May 8th. He's had one setback, and that was drinking. But he's on the right path. How do I keep him above that water? Where do I tell him to go? How do I tell him to act? And without community involvement, he can't go to a therapist because he can't get a job, he can't get insurance.
You're amazing. You're doing it. You're here, you're looking for answers, you're helping him, you've been there, you've supported him. Like you said, without the family support that he's had, it could have been worse. And maybe he wouldn't be at a place right now where he can work and he can take care of himself and his kids. But where do you go from here? It's so hard. That's why this conversation has been so important. And I wish I could just hand you a bucket full of answers that would fix it. But you're doing the right thing, asking the questions. I know that there's a lot more people here that are more qualified to tell you how to get him into treatment or how to get him into just counseling that without insurance. There are things available. So,
Well, he is by court order having to go to receipt treatment. He's in one right now, active, and one starts in another few weeks. But the thing is that, again, like I said, without, how are you going to help pay a sliding scale fee when you're only making $8 an hour and have
Right.
3 children to raise?
right,
The system has failed him. The system has failed him, and he feels it. I've asked him to come the last 3 times to this so he can hear and listen, and he refuses to because he knows that it's going to fail him again. He feels like it's going to fail
Sure.
him again, but I refuse to give up. I want to make a difference, not just for my child, but for our community.
exactly.
You guys mind if I jump in here for a second? Man, I'm Officer Knopf from the Hutchinson Police Department. I have a correspondent with your young family. If your son is actively looking for help, if that's what he wants, we are more than happy to try and get him hooked up with any resources that we possibly have available. We work with a lot of people up here. We work with a lot of people out in the community. We can get you help. I think Peter, he already motioned to me. I think he's going to grab your information.
Okay.
We can start working with you, okay? You're not alone in this. That's why we're here. That's why everybody's here, okay? So.
And I don't want this to be my last time here. I've been wanting to do this for quite some time, and I've been involved in the community for quite some time too, and this is one of my goals, is to keep doing this and get involved. So thank you for everything you guys done.
And ma'am, too, please grab one of those.
I picked up everybody's
sheets.
cards and papers up there already, so.
And both of you and your son, should look into coming to one of the Reno Recovery Collaborative meetings, because even if he can't necessarily or isn't able to go to treatment or counseling, what he can do is start hanging out with other people who are being a part of the solution as well, and changing that structural stigma of that system that's failed at times. That's how we affect change, is by getting involved. So please, if you both would do that, it'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, everyone. So now we're going to move on. Anna, if you could please take us back to the first word cloud from the very first event. All right. So this was the first community conversation. We started out with, what words have you heard used to describe someone with substance use issues? Ugh. That's pretty interesting, isn't it? See, while that was up there, we discussed with Cody, right over there, we discussed trauma. We discussed a little bit about what you talked about how it affects us differently. I loved the big T, little t. That was so great. We discussed stigma, the different types. And in the first one, we mostly discussed the self-stigma and the social stigma. We heard from people, yes, people, not those words. We heard from fathers. We heard from a couple of really amazing individuals that are in this room right now. These men were fathers. They worked jobs. They had other mental health issues and substance use issues, but didn't get the help they needed because many times of workplace policies, yes, structural stigma, and because of other forms of stigma associated with mental health. but there was still hope. We also talked to individuals with families, family members that were struggling with substance use disorder. See, these ones, they couldn't talk about what was going on in their family members' lives because of that social stigma, because of the judgment. And therefore, there was many times where they suffered in uncertainty and in silence, alone, until now. Anna, what about the next word cloud? Oh yeah, so after everybody heard from Derek and Matt and Lori and Cody and Denise, look at how it changed. What words could one use to describe someone with substance use issues? Brother, person, parent, needed, worthy of love, friend, brave, leader. Do we see the difference? See, this is what happens when we create safe spaces in our communities to talk about the tough issues. And when we have the courage to remove labels and look at people as people. How powerful of a concept, yet so simple. And now to the next slide from the second event, please. This one, what do you feel holds people back from getting help with substance misuse? Lack of affordable therapy, resources, fear, stigma, denial, finances. So in this one, we delved into the structural stigma, the barriers. We heard some amazing facts from our professionals about substance use disorder being what it is. Not a choice, but a chronic yet treatable illness. Not a moral failing. We heard from a woman that from a very young age experienced stigma all the way back in school and in various settings of her life and her battle with substance use. We heard about how it affected her in more ways than just the treatment, housing, jobs. We even heard from a judge and a law enforcement officer about the policies that are sometimes in place that even hold them back at times. But we also heard about programs that they're utilizing to work on the issues and to help those, to offer more assistance and to break down those barriers. And the final slide from that conversation, Anna. And look how it changed. It went from a lot of things that are really outside of our control, like the finances and things like that, to look. What can move people forward? Education, understanding, support, compassion. Things that all of us can do. Every single one of us can do that. Now, could we see the results from tonight? Are those available? Amazing. Great. All right, so the first one. What do you feel is a solution to substance misuse? Okay. Well, this is interesting. So we have just say no. We have education, support, definitely not prison, connection, compassion, a lot of love for Gary. So what about the next slide? How much of a change did we see between that first one and the last one? Yeah. So we see a lot of them that are still the basic same things, right? That maybe these community conversations are getting us towards the same way of thinking. Could we consider that progress, maybe? I would consider that progress. All right, so once again, I'm going to ask you guys, the final plug, to fill out that survey by scanning the QR code. Please put in your email address and join the Reno Recovery Collaborative. We need you. We need your neighbors. We need everyone. While we've made great strides in the work that we're doing, the biggest room in the world is the room for improvement. So our goal has been to educate, empower, and engage. Do you feel like you have been educated? Do you feel as if you have learned something over the course of the last 3 months at these events? See, I know for myself, when I learn something new, it's empowering. I see Derek over there laughing because me and him are always sharing something we're reading together. See, it's a new perception. It's like I'm being able to look at it with a new set of eyes and to get a deeper understanding. So do you feel empowered by this new sense of understanding of your fellow Reno County residents? I know I do. Now, does this make you want to engage others with that education and with that empowerment? For me, I definitely want to. So what are we going to do about it? Well, I'm going to ask a question that we've asked at every point in these conversations. If you can, if you are able, please stand up if you have ever struggled with substance use disorder. And stay standing. Now, please stand if someone you love has ever struggled with substance use disorder. Now stand if you just know someone affected by substance use disorder. Stay standing. All of us here today, we are supporters of all in our community, including those with substance use disorder. We obviously understand the importance of recognizing the high prevalence of substance misuse. Now, we also know that when recognition is coupled with re-education and understanding, health-seeking action can be taken, and these actions can lead to recovery, which is possible for every single person. The 3 E's that we've been discussing, educate, empower, and engage, help us to create safe spaces for uncomfortable conversations and get rid of stigma surrounding substance use, and to get our community more actively involved. This is what we as community members and we as individuals not can do, but will do. Make this commitment with me. We will continue to challenge our beliefs and further educate ourselves and others. We will take what we have learned here and incorporate it in our daily lives, whether it be in the way we think about others or the way we speak about others. It begins with us. It begins with you, and it begins with me. Do you make this commitment with me? That's what I'm talking about. As you can sit down now. Thank you guys. Man, that's awesome. So, as we have seen, people can and do recover. There's nothing that they cannot accomplish. For those in recovery, I want you to know that you never, ever, ever have to settle. This is our journey. There's no destination. We do not have to be the token person in recovery. We are here and we are not going away. All of us came here together to stand up and fight stigma and to be there for all the members in our community. I ask you, since we all just made that commitment, please hold one another accountable to the commitment that we just made. Continue to change the way we think. Look for any positive change. In conclusion, let's think about a question that Vanessa asked. What do you want to contribute to the soil of Reno County? Think about that as you go home to your families and as you go back to work. What kind of soil or what kind of contribution do you want to make to the soil of Reno County? All right, thank you everyone for joining us for the third and for now final installment of Community Conversations.